Ladies, gentlemen, and Dark Crusaders of all ages, it's been more than 7 months since the release of Lords of the Fallen, and while a lot of people played the game and enjoyed it upon its release, myself included, a lot of people upon finishing the game sort of just moved on and let it drop off of their radar. Most games like this post-release just sort of stop, maybe a balance patch here or there, but Lords of the Fallen has had some incredibly major updates, and so today, in partnership with the folks over at CI Games and Hexworks behind the game, we're going to talk about the more impactful features of nearly 3 dozen post-launch updates that the game has seen, featuring changes on a near weekly basis, what's changed that you may have missed, how it's impacted the actual feeling of the game at this point, and of course we'll have a bit of a deeper talk about the 2 most major updates, the Master of Fate update, which essentially lets you customize the game to a ridiculous degree to sort of decide not just your own difficulty, but even just fully change your experience and the way that it feels to play the game, with things like inbuilt randomizers and even permadeath, letting you sort of turn the game into a roguelite version of itself, and then the update hitting as we speak, Clash of Champions. This has a whole-on separate way to play the game focused on bosses. Nope, I lied just a little bit just so I can impress you even more when I tell you that it has 2 full-on new ways to play the game based around bosses. And again, for a game that released over 7 months ago that I know a lot of people haven't thought about since their first playthrough, this is absolutely worth checking out. I mean, there has just never been a better time to play Lords of the Fallen than it is right now, if it's something that has ever interested you, whether you've already played it before or not. Not to mention, the game is now available on Game Pass, both on Xbox and PC, so for anyone who has those memberships anyways and hasn't played the game before, you now just own it. Congratulations! As for what's changed, in a larger sense, the game as a whole has seen a number of improvements, especially in areas like performance and optimization, just running far better on most machines, which of course offers a smoother experience for all players across the board. And along with that, there has been a number of other ways to enhance the smoothness of your experience, just in a more gameplay-related sense. Things like the ability to change the appearance of an existing character, the ability to change your keybinds on a gamepad, whether for convenience and comfort or just because you enjoy using a claw grip whenever possible. Even things like an increase to the base inventory so that space is less of a constant concern, which makes sense of course as more and more actual content is being added to the game really. Since release, there has been multiple full new quest lines added onto the game, new armor, new weapons, a whole host of new spells and grievous strikes for the various weapons, projectiles, things like that all are just thematic to these different additions, not to mention full-on bonus secret abilities for various boss weapons to sort of bring them in line with the ones that already had these. And importantly, well, all of this new stuff is being added to flesh out the game and just make it feel like an even more than complete package. The base game itself has been carefully combed over and rebalanced several times, resulting in just changed difficulty across the board really, decreased mob density in the vast majority of the game really, a decrease in the power of ranged attacks from enemies, which is obviously great because anyone who played the game before that change knows quite well how devastating the ranged attacks could be in the game beforehand. And something that people who aren't aware of it but might be very appreciative of this is that at this stage the PvP side of the game has been getting completely separate balance updates to the PvE side of it, because honestly it's impossible to balance both of these together in a simple way, but that means if you are a fan of PvP and action RPGs and this type of game in general, this could well be worth giving a go in its updated format these days as well to see how you feel about it. Past that, we should then talk about the central parts of the 2 most major updates in greater detail. First, starting with Master of Fate, aptly named. This came out last month, and it lets you genuinely customize your playthrough of Lords of the Fallen. Essentially, after pressing New Game and creating your character on the final stage, you will be given the choice of being able to add additional game modifiers for your playthrough. You can activate any number of these and in any combination that you'd like to as well. Iron Man is your classic permadeath, where if you die in the Umbral Realm, you die for real, resetting entirely as far as your actual play progression through the game. But the fun part of this is that you keep your actual character level progression and your inventory and equipment and such as well. So essentially, it turns the game into a sort of roguelite more than anything else, which is honestly a really neat way to add a basically bonus game mode entirely to the classic formula of the gameplay itself. The next modifier then is pre-upgraded loot. This is an option to just make the upgrade system simpler, making it so any equipment that you find in the world or from enemies, things like that, will have upgrades applied to them dependent on your actual player level when you find them. This works quite well in combination with the next modifier, which is randomized loot. This makes every bit of loot in the game completely random as well, a classic concept usually reserved for mods to RPGs, but in this case being added in by the developers themselves, which is cool to see. Just replacing every single loot spawn or loot drop from an enemy that isn't a specific boss drop, or just in the world as well, completely random. You could get a sick weapon from the first enemy that you kill, or you could get a rusty shovel from an endgame creature. And on a similar wavelength, the setting that I would expect is almost always used in conjunction with that, which is randomized enemies. This doesn't affect any actual proper named bosses in the game, the ones that have their own titles and the screen-wide health bars, but it does affect every other enemy position and type within the game, which is really neat in itself for making a playthrough feel just completely fresh and different from your first time through the game. There's also a modifier to just increase the enemy density in general, basically to offset density reductions done to the game as a base. If you miss the old density and want it to be just completely restored to that level, this is the setting that you want to turn on for sure. Then we have the withered healing modifier, which makes it so any healing that you get is only actually applied to you after doing damage, all applied as wither healing, meaning that you have to be full offense for any sort of regen at any point in your journey, for anyone who likes to have, a bit of an extra challenge. And I say a bit, that's actually a significant bit of extra challenge. If you thought the game was too easy, this is absolutely a great way to make it a lot harder for yourself, even without doing something like permadeath. It just makes every fight that much more difficult to actually get through, because you have to work for your healing a lot harder. The final modifier then is one for people who really want to push themselves for the long sections of time, which is vestige decay. With this setting off on no decay, you will have every vestige available in the game along your journey. On minor vestige decay, it just disables a few of the vestiges around to make it a little bit of a longer and harsher progression journey between your various rest points. Then extensive vestige decay, which only really leaves you with a couple per level or area, and of course tremendous vestige decay, which removes all but a handful pretty much of the vestiges, which are, to be fair, in relatively convenient locations for that setting, for sure, but it still definitely raises the stakes just a ludicrous amount really to play this way. Not to mention if you mix and match a whole lot of these different modifiers together. For example, doing something like Iron Man in combination with randomized enemies and randomized loot, not to mention with pre-upgraded loot, so that way if you do die and reset to the start, any items that you find from that point will still carry on with the level your character is, which is just a really interesting way that these things interact with each other through the system that I find quite cool. Then we have the newest major update to hit the game, Clash of Champions, and where the Master of Fate's update's main goal was to create entirely new ways to engage with a full playthrough of the game, or just even change what that concept was, really. Clash of Champions, as an update, is essentially endeavoring to give you a way to play Lords of the Fallen in a wholly different way. In shorter bursts, if you want to, but higher adrenaline and higher pressure, and focus on many people's favorite parts of these types of games as a whole, which are the boss fights, which, by the way, have been updated a significant amount from the base version of the game too. With this update, there is now not only the new Echoes of Battle system that you can engage with at any vestige, and this lets you fight any boss that you have encountered in the past in this playthrough once again, but there is also even the new Crucible system, which puts you through a themed gauntlet of bosses that you have to fight in order. If you die to any of them, you have to start again from the beginning of that actual boss gauntlet. And one thing that I think is really cool about this especially is that it seems to scale to your character, at least somewhat. Maybe they're just scaled more towards endgame, but specifically what I was noticing is that the gauntlet versions of these bosses specifically just take a lot more killing and do a fair amount more damage than the general Echoes of Battle version of the bosses, which means that the gauntlets are an even further enhanced challenge for people who want to revisit earlier bosses, but in later game equipment and builds properly. So, I mean, for the most part, this has shaped up to simply be a way to play the game in a much more focused way, a way to really dive into the deeper and more satisfying moments of the boss combat without the level clearing in between, and a way to either enjoy the game in small bursts or in repeated bursts in a longer gauntlet of back-to-back fights in the Crucible itself, but either way, it lets you revisit fights that you may not have otherwise been able to without a more extended secondary playthrough, which for a lot of people is honestly a pretty big deal. The boss fights are a really cool part of this game, and so the ability to go through them just again whenever you want is neat in itself. Altogether, Lords of the Fallen has had an honestly astonishing amount of free content updates added post-launch, over 7 months now of genuinely active support for the game since its release, and while there have been a lot of smaller but important updates for things like performance and quality of life, it also includes some genuinely major optional ways to shift the gameplay and make the game feel totally different when you dive back into it. Weapons, spells, armor, different abilities being added, content, and of course, the full-on gameplay updates that we've been talking about here for the last few minutes. If you enjoyed Lords of the Fallen the first time around that you engaged with it, now is a good time to give it another look for sure. And if you're someone who never played it the first time, now is the time to definitely take a look into the game a bit more and see if it's right to you, especially as, again, it is now available on Game Pass on both Xbox and PC, really just to open it up to an even larger audience. Huge thanks again to CI Games and Hexworks for sponsoring this video, and I wish you all the best of luck in your continued journey throughout the realms. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.